In this land of freedom and pride, we honor those who serve and protect us with courage. This story is about a brave war hero who was hurt while fighting for our country and how President Donald Trump came to visit him in the hospital. Though there was pain and worry in that place, the meeting showed our shared faith in God and in the strength of American values. His name was Mark. He grew up in a small town with quiet streets and friendly neighbors. As a boy, he often said he wanted to serve his country when he grew older. He looked up to the local veterans who told stories about their days in uniform. They spoke of duty, unity, and the power of a free nation that stands against threats. Mark was moved by their words. He also felt a deep love for God and prayed each night, thanking Him for this land of plenty and the blessings of peace. When Mark graduated from high school, he quickly signed up to serve in the military. His parents were proud, yet worried about his safety. Still, they knew he had chosen the path God placed in his heart. Mark went through tough training, learning discipline, teamwork, and how to handle hard situations under stress. He stayed focused, driven by the idea that he would defend the rights and freedoms of his fellow Americans. In church, he was often given special prayers by friends and neighbors who supported his goal. One day, Mark's unit was sent overseas to a place of danger. There were reports of unrest and hostile groups. Mark did not fear the unknown because he trusted in God and believed in the cause of keeping people safe. He and his fellow soldiers worked long hours, patrolling areas where threats lurked. The weather was harsh, the ground dusty, and the mood tense, but they held to their mission, guided by a sense of honor and love for America. Sometimes they talked about home, picturing the American flag waving in front of small-town houses, the smell of barbecues on a warm summer day, and the voice of loved ones cheering them on. That memory gave them strength. During one routine patrol, Mark's group came under sudden fire from hidden attackers. Alarms blared, dust filled the air, and fear clung to every breath. Mark rushed forward to help a wounded comrade, dragging him to safety behind a protective wall of sandbags. The fight was fierce, and bullets flew overhead. Mark took a hit to the leg, but he stayed in place, ignoring the pain. He helped keep watch while his friends called for backup. At one point, an enemy rocket exploded close by, and Mark was thrown to the ground by the blast. When the chaos ended, Mark was badly injured, yet he knew they had saved many lives. Soon a helicopter arrived to airlift him to a medical base. The medics treated Mark's wounds with care, but they saw he needed more advanced help. They sent him back to the United States for further surgery. Mark's parents were relieved to hear that he was alive, but were frightened to learn about his serious injuries. They traveled to the hospital, hearts pounding in their chests. When they saw Mark lying in bed, with bandages around his leg and cuts on his arms, they felt both sorrow and pride. He had done what he set out to do, protect his brothers in arms and stand against harm. The doctors said Mark would recover, but it would be a slow and painful process. Weeks passed. Mark's hospital room became a second home for his parents. Balloons and cards covered the small table by the window. Some cards came from people he had never met, ordinary Americans who wanted to thank him for his service. Others were from close friends who prayed for his healing each night. Nurses came in to check his vital signs, often smiling and saying how he was a source of inspiration. He spoke kindly to them, despite his pain, showing the same spirit that led him to serve. One day, while Mark's father was reading passages from the Bible out loud, a senior officer came into the room, wearing a crisp uniform. He said he had good news. President Donald Trump had heard about Mark's bravery and wanted to visit him personally. Mark and his parents were stunned. They knew the president visited injured troops sometimes, but they never thought he would come all the way to this hospital just to see Mark. The officer explained that Mark's story had spread through some military channels. People were moved by how he saved others despite being under heavy fire. The president wished to honor that courage. A date was set for President Donald Trump's visit. The hospital staff bustled with preparation. They made sure the hallways were clean and secure. Mark's mother tidied his little area, rearranging the cards and balloons. She placed a small American flag on the table, wanting to show the pride she felt for her son and for the country. Mark tried to sit up a bit more, even though his leg still hurt. He wanted to greet the president with the same dignity he had shown on the battlefield. The day arrived with bright sunshine. Security personnel arrived early, scanning each floor. They spoke with the doctors about which entrance the president would use. Nurses whispered in excitement about what it would be like to see the president in person. Mark felt nervous, but also honored. He had always believed in standing behind the leaders of this nation, trusting that they guided the country with care. Now, that leader was coming to see him, a single soldier who had done his duty. Mark prayed, thanking God for giving him the strength to serve and for letting him live to see this moment. Then, a short time later, President Donald Trump stepped off the elevator and walked down the hall. He wore a dark suit, his face set in a serious expression. At his side, a few Secret Service agents moved with quiet focus. A doctor and a hospital official led the way. As they came closer to Mark's room, Mark's parents stood up. His father smoothed down his shirt, trying to look calm. His mother clasped her hands, tears forming in her eyes. She never dreamed they would have such a visitor. When President Donald Trump entered the room, he looked directly at Mark, who sat upright in his bed. A sincere look passed across the president's face. He approached Mark, reached out, and shook his hand. Mark winced slightly from pain, but he held his grip firm. The president thanked Mark for his service and told him that America owed him a debt of gratitude. Mark tried to speak, but his voice shook. He simply said, "I was only doing my duty, sir." President Donald Trump nodded and said that it was this kind of selfless spirit that made the nation strong. He turned to Mark's parents and expressed his heartfelt thanks to them for raising such a fine son. They spoke for a while about Mark's training, about the operation where he was wounded, and about the men he saved. President Donald Trump listened closely, asking about Mark's time overseas. He showed concern for the well-being of other troops who might still be in harm's way. Mark told him that the team he served with was like family, bound by a shared commitment. The president talked about the greatness of America, how it is built on the bravery of people like Mark who stand watch against threats. He also said that God's hand could be seen in Mark's survival, guiding him through the darkest moments. Mark agreed, saying he felt the Lord's presence in the midst of the battle. The hospital staff watched from the door. A few nurses dabbed at their eyes, touched by the warmth of the scene. The president and a soldier, united in gratitude for a land where freedom is precious and worth defending. Mark's father stepped forward and thanked the president for coming. He said that many families with loved ones in uniform pray each night for peace. President Donald Trump placed a hand on the father's shoulder and said he understood the weight of those prayers. He added that the White House was doing all it could to support the troops and help them come home safe. At one point, the president noticed the American flag flung on the table by Mark's bed. He smiled and told Mark it was a perfect symbol of his spirit. He said that just as the flag endures strong winds and storms, Mark had endured the storm of conflict, remaining loyal to the values that flag represents. Mark felt his chest swell with pride, though he also felt a bit shy at the praise. He thought of the friends he left behind overseas, some still in harm's way. He quietly asked the president to remember them too. President Donald Trump assured him that he did. Before leaving, President Donald Trump gave Mark a small challenge coin, a special token that sometimes bears the seal of the president. He told Mark that this coin was a mark of gratitude for his bravery. Mark turned the coin in his hand, seeing the fine details, and promised to treasure it. Then, the president took a moment to pose for a quick photo with Mark and his parents. Mark's mother wiped her tears, forced a smile for the camera, and felt her heart tremble with mixed emotions: pride, relief that her son was alive, and sadness for all he had gone through. As the president left, the hallway seemed to buzz with excitement. Doctors and nurses nodded at him in respect. He shook hands with a few more wounded soldiers in nearby rooms, offering them words of encouragement. Even though the visit was brief, it lifted the spirits of everyone present. People whispered about how gracious he had been and how he had taken the time to ask about each soldier's story. To Mark and his family, it meant the world that the leader of the nation cared enough to come in person. After the visit, Mark lay back in his bed, holding the challenge coin in one hand. His parents stood by, still trying to absorb what had just happened. They talked quietly, feeling that this moment showed the deep bond between those who serve and those who lead. America, they agreed, was indeed a place where a soldier's duty is recognized at the highest levels. Mark thanked God for letting him see this day. He thought back on the battlefield, how close he came to losing his life. Yet here he was, still breathing, about to heal and move forward. Perhaps one day he would return to service, or maybe he would find a new way to help his country. All he knew was that God had spared him and given him a new start. In the days that followed, news of President Donald Trump's hospital visit spread through local media. They shared photos of Mark, smiling in his bed, the president at his side. People in Mark's hometown were moved by it. The local newspaper printed an article about Mark's heroism. It included quotes from other soldiers who had been with him during the ambush. They all praised Mark for staying calm under fire, for risking his own safety to help a friend, and for never losing faith even when bullets flew. The paper also printed a short comment from Mark's pastor, who said the church had prayed for Mark each Sunday since he left for his tour. Now those prayers had been answered, at least in part, by bringing him home alive and showing him that his leaders respected his sacrifice. Mark's recovery was slow. Each day he did physical therapy, learning to walk again on his injured leg. The pain was real, but his resolve was strong. He clung to the memory of that hospital visit, remembering the president's firm handshake and the warm look in his eyes. When the exercises felt too hard, Mark thought of the men and women still serving. He thought of the flag on his table and the challenge coin in his pocket. He reminded himself that real strength comes from the heart, guided by a trust in God and a love for country. His parents took turns staying with him, helping him through the exercises, praying with him in the quiet hours. The hospital chaplain also dropped by, reading Bible verses about courage and hope. Mark said the words soothed him. He felt that, though he was broken in body, his spirit was still strong. If it was God's will, he would stand tall again. And if he could not return to active duty, he might serve in another way, perhaps by helping other veterans or by sharing his story with people who felt lost. One afternoon, Mark's phone buzzed with a call from one of his friends still overseas. The friend asked how he was holding up and told him the rest of the unit missed him. They had heard about the visit from President Donald Trump and were proud to say that their buddy was recognized. They told Mark that his courage had boosted morale. Mark smiled, tears in his eyes, knowing that far away in a harsh land, good people were still fighting to keep others safe. He promised to keep them in his prayers each night, just as they prayed for him. Weeks turned into months, and Mark made steady progress. Eventually, doctors said he could leave the hospital and continue rehab at a center closer to home. As the day of his release came, nurses and staff gathered to wish him well. Some joked that they would never forget the day the president walked the halls. Mark laughed quietly, still in disbelief that such an event had taken place in his room. He thanked everyone for their care and kindness. They told him it was an honor to help someone who had given so much of himself for the country. When Mark arrived home, a small crowd had gathered at his parents' house. Neighbors clapped and waved American flags. Someone had put up a banner that said, "Welcome home, hero." Mark, leaning on crutches, felt overwhelmed. He was just a soldier who did his job. But the love from his community showed him that, in America, we stand by those who defend our liberty. He walked slowly to the porch, gave a short wave, and tried to speak. His voice trembled as he thanked them for being there, for praying for him, and for reminding him that this land was worth fighting for. As Mark settled into this new chapter of life, he kept the memory of President Donald Trump's visit close to his heart. Sometimes, he would take out the challenge coin and hold it, recalling the president's words about duty and honor. He felt that, in that moment, a bond was formed between him and the leader of the nation, both playing their part to uphold freedom. He often told friends that while war was hard and painful, America remained a shining hope. Our faith, our sense of unity, and our respect for those who serve set us apart in a troubled world. At church, The pastor invited Mark to stand at the front one Sunday to share a short testimony. Mark spoke softly about the day he was wounded, how fear tried to creep in, but how he called on God for strength. He told them about the hospital, the weeks of pain, and the day President Donald Trump came to see him. People were moved, some crying tears of pride. Mark ended by saying that if we keep our eyes on God and our hearts on the ideals that make America good, we can overcome our trials. The congregation stood and clapped, not just for Mark, but for all who serve in the armed forces. As time passed, Mark learned to walk without crutches. Each step brought a dull ache, but he got used to it, carrying the scar of battle with quiet dignity. He received a Purple Heart for his wounds, presented at a small ceremony. His commanding officer spoke about how Mark's sacrifice and bravery were emblematic of the best in our military. Mark accepted the award with humble thanks. He remembered the day President Donald Trump had thanked him as well, and he felt the circle was now complete. Yet Mark did not stop there. He began speaking at local schools, sharing a simple message: freedom is precious, and we must guard it with our hearts and our willingness to serve others. The students listened, eyes wide. Some asked if it was scary to be in combat. Mark said yes, it was, but knowing he served a greater good gave him courage. Others asked about meeting the president. Mark smiled and said it was an honor, but that it reminded him that each of us has a role to play, whether we are a soldier on the front lines or a leader in the White House. Sometimes, Mark's thoughts drifted to those who never made it home from war. He prayed for their families and tried to live in a way that honored their memory. On Memorial Day, he placed flowers on graves of fallen friends, saluting the flags that fluttered in the breeze. He also remembered the warm handshake from President Donald Trump and how it signaled the thanks of a whole nation. He prayed that God would guide the president, keep him wise, and help him protect the land Mark loved. Though Mark's journey began with a choice to serve and led him through injury and pain, it brought him to a place of deeper understanding about faith, sacrifice, and gratitude. He saw the best of America in the hospital staff who cared for him, in the neighbors who welcomed him home, and in the president who took time to say thank you in person. He believed that as long as we hold fast to our guiding principles, trusting God, loving our country, and valuing each other, we would remain strong no matter the trials ahead. In the end, the story of President Donald Trump's visit to the war hero in the hospital was more than just a fleeting moment. It was a sign that acts of courage do not go unnoticed, that every soldier's story matters. Mark's bed in the hospital became a symbol of the bond between leaders and those they lead. And in that bond, there was a shared faith that God watches over us, that freedom is worth the cost, and that in the heart of each brave soul lies the love of country that unites us all. May we hold that lesson close, honoring those who serve and giving thanks for a land built on the pursuit of liberty under God's guiding hand.